The air inside Fort Benning's tank museum hung heavy with the scent of metal and engine oil. History lived here in steel and iron monuments to American might. Sunlight streamed through high windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors and glinting off the massive war machines. To most visitors, they were just tanks. To Charles "Iron Charlie" Harmon, they were old friends. Charlie walked with the dignified gait of a man who had commanded men in battle. At 75, his back remained straight despite the years weighing on his frame. His weathered face bore the lines of 1,000 decisions, each etched by the responsibility of lives in his hands. His steel gray hair was cut in the same military style he'd worn for over 50 years. Beside him strode his 17-year-old grandson, Matthew, eyes wide with admiration as they toured the cavernous exhibition hall. The boy paused before the imposing form of an M1 Abrams, its desert tan paint immaculate, its 120mm gun aimed towards some imaginary horizon. The machine was a masterpiece of American engineering, 62 tons of armor and firepower. "This is the one you commanded, right, Grandpa?" Matthew asked, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. Charlie smiled, a warm gesture that softened the hard edges of his face. "No, son, that's the new breed. My old friend was the M60 Patton." He gestured toward another tank further down the hall, its profile distinct with its rounded turret and shorter gun. The Patton was the workhorse of its day, not as fast or fancy as this modern thoroughbred, but reliable as sunrise. Matthew seemed disappointed. The Abrams was sleeker, more impressive to his young eyes. Charlie noticed and placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Don't judge a tank by its paint job, Matt. The M60A3 TTS could hit a target at over 2 miles. The thermal sight gave us vision in pitch darkness, and that 105mm gun could punch through Soviet armor like it was tissue paper." Charlie moved toward the M60 Patton, his steps measured and reverent. He ran his fingertips along the cold metal hull, feeling the familiar contours. For a moment, he wasn't in a museum. He was back in the commander's cupola, the Texas sun beating down on his helmet, the roar of the Continental diesel engine vibrating through his bones. "This machine saved my life more times than I can count," he said quietly, "and the lives of my crew." Matthew moved closer, sensing there was more to his grandfather's story than the occasional war tales shared at Thanksgiving dinner. The boy was heading to West Point next fall, following the Harmon family tradition of military service that stretched back 4 generations. "Is that why they called you Iron Charlie?" he asked. Charlie's eyes remained fixed on the tank. "No, that came later, after Lost Heaven." Something in his grandfather's tone made Matthew pause. Lost Heaven, he'd never heard that name before. "What's Lost Heaven, Grandpa?" Before Charlie could answer, a voice called out from across the exhibition hall. A voice that sent a jolt through Charlie's body like an electrical current. "Charlie? Charlie Harmon?" Charlie turned slowly, his face draining of color as though he'd seen a ghost. In many ways he had. Walking toward them was an elderly man with a pronounced limp, leaning on a cane. Behind him followed a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, her hand supportively on the man's elbow. "Tommy?" Charlie whispered, his voice barely audible. "Tommy Gunn?" The man approached, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile. Tears welled in both men's eyes as they regarded each other in disbelief. "They told me you were dead," Charlie said, his voice thick with emotion. Thomas "Tommy" Gunn Wilkins shook his head slowly. "Almost was. Woke up 3 weeks later in a Navajo clinic. By then, they'd already shipped you stateside." The two men embraced, an embrace 40 years in the making. Matthew stood awkwardly to the side, alongside the young woman who had accompanied Tommy. "This is my granddaughter, Sophie," Tommy said, gesturing to the young woman, studying military history at Georgetown. Charlie nodded in greeting, then placed his hand on Matthew's shoulder. "My grandson, Matthew, West Point bound." The elderly men smiled at each other, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The torch was being passed to a new generation. "I never thought I'd see you again, Tommy," Charlie said, his voice steadier now, but still charged with emotion. "Not after what happened at Lost Heaven." Tommy's expression darkened. "Some ghosts never stay buried, do they, Captain?" Charlie nodded grimly. "No, they don't." Matthew and Sophie exchanged confused glances. "Grandpa, what's Lost Heaven?" Matthew asked again. Charlie's gaze drifted back to the M60 Patton, his mind traveling back 4 decades to a time of dust and blood and fear, when the fate of thousands had rested on the shoulders of a young tank commander and his loyal crew. "It all started in 1986, he began, his voice distant, as if he was already back there. At Fort Hood, Texas, the summer heat of Central Texas was oppressive, a physical weight pressing down on the sprawling military base. Fort Hood, home of the 1st Armored Division, stretched out across the landscape like a small city. Dust devils swirled across the training grounds as a column of 5 M60A3 TTS Patton tanks thundered across the terrain, their treads churning up clouds of dirt. Captain Charles "Charlie" Harmon stood in the commander's cupola of the lead tank, his torso exposed above the turret. At 35, he was older than most tank company commanders. Most of his peers had moved on to staff positions, chasing promotions behind desks. Charlie had fought to stay with the tanks. He'd rather breathe diesel fumes than shuffle papers. His tank, nicknamed Steel Justice, led the formation across the mock battlefield. Inside the cramped confines of the turret, 3 other men operated as extensions of Charlie's will. Thomas "Tommy Gun" Wilkins, the gunner, sat to Charlie's right, his eye pressed to the thermal sight. James "Eagle Eye" Martinez, the loader, stood ready to feed the 105mm gun. Michael "Steady Hand" Johnson controlled the 62-ton behemoth from the driver's compartment, his skilled touch guiding the massive machine with surprising grace. They were executing a flanking maneuver against an opposing force in a training exercise. Charlie had spotted a weakness in the enemy's right flank and was exploiting it with textbook precision. His company of 5 tanks moved in perfect formation, maintaining spacing and speed as they maneuvered around a ridge that would conceal their approach. "Target 2 o'clock. Range 1,600 meters," Charlie called down to Tommy. "Tank, Sabah." "Identified," Tommy responded, already rotating the turret. Inside, Martinez selected an armor-piercing round, lifting the 40-pound projectile with practiced ease and sliding it into the breech. "Up," Martinez called, indicating the gun was loaded. "On the way," Tommy said, pressing the firing trigger. The tank rocked backward as the gun roared, sending the depleted uranium penetrator downrange at over a mile per second. Through his binoculars, Charlie watched as the round struck the target tank dead center, a direct hit that would have destroyed an actual enemy tank. "Target destroyed," Charlie announced with satisfaction. "Driver, continue, advance." The exercise proceeded flawlessly. Charlie's company outmaneuvered the opposing force, achieving all objectives with minimal simulated casualties. When they returned to the motor pool, the tanks dusty but undamaged, Charlie's superior was waiting. Colonel Frank Williams stood ramrod straight, his combat boots polished to a mirror shine despite the dusty environment. At 55, Williams was a decorated Vietnam veteran who had seen the worst of tank warfare in the jungle. His face was perpetually serious, as though he had forgotten how to smile sometime around 1968. "Impressive work out there, Captain Harmon," Williams said as Charlie dismounted from his tank. "You have a knack for finding the enemy's weak point." Charlie accepted the compliment with a nod. "Thank you, sir. The crew deserves the credit. They execute flawlessly." Williams's expression turned grave. "Walk with me, Captain." They moved away from the tanks, out of earshot of the crews performing post-operation maintenance. "I've received orders from Division," Williams said, his voice low, "concerning your company." Charlie waited, sensing this wasn't about the training exercise. "What I'm about to tell you is classified top secret," Williams continued. "Eyes only, understood?" "Yes, sir." Williams glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. 3 days ago, a group of terrorists infiltrated a National Guard armory in New Mexico. They made off with several weapons, including something that wasn't supposed to be there. Charlie felt a chill despite the Texas heat. "What was it, sir?" Williams met his gaze directly. "A Soviet T-72 main battle tank." Charlie's mind raced. The T-72 was the backbone of Soviet armored divisions, a formidable opponent to American M60s. Its 125mm smoothbore gun could penetrate American armor at combat ranges. But how had one ended up in a National Guard armory? "It was captured intact during a covert operation," Williams explained, answering the unasked question. "Transported back for technical evaluation. The public story was that it was a movie prop." "And now terrorists have it," Charlie said, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Not just one," Williams corrected. "Intelligence suggests they have acquired 7 more from international arms dealers. They're building a small armored force in the New Mexico desert." Charlie's tactical mind immediately began assessing the threat. 8 T-72 tanks in the hands of terrorists on American soil was unprecedented. "Who are these people, sir? What's their objective?" "That's what we need to find out," Williams replied. Your company is being deployed to Fort Bliss immediately. From there, you'll conduct reconnaissance and, if necessary, neutralize the threat. This operation doesn't exist, Captain. The American public cannot know that terrorists have Soviet tanks on U.S. soil. Charlie understood. Such news would cause widespread panic. When do we move out? Tomorrow at 0600, select your best crews, full combat load. As Williams walked away, Charlie stood motionless, contemplating the mission ahead. A tank battle on American soil. It was unthinkable, yet now it was his responsibility. He returned to his tank, where Tommy was supervising the maintenance. Something big coming down? Tommy asked, noticing Charlie's expression. Yeah, Charlie replied quietly. Something very big. Later that evening, Charlie sat alone in his modest on-base quarters, studying maps of the New Mexico desert spread across his kitchen table. The terrain would be challenging for tanks, rocky outcroppings, narrow passes, deep arroyos, but it also offered excellent defensive positions for an ambush. A knock at his door interrupted his planning. Standing on his doorstep was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Danvers, a woman whose reputation preceded her. At 42, she had served in military intelligence for nearly 2 decades, specializing in Soviet weapons and tactics. Her dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and her eyes held the sharp focus of someone who missed nothing. Colonel Williams said you needed a briefing on the T-72, she said without preamble. Charlie invited her in, clearing space at the table among his maps. Thank you for coming, Colonel, he said, offering her coffee. Sarah is fine for this operation, she replied, accepting the cup. This is off the books. She placed a thick folder on the table and opened it to reveal technical specifications and photographs of the Soviet tank. The T-72M1 model you'll be facing is equipped with a 125mm 2A46 smoothbore main gun, she began. It uses an autoloader system instead of a human loader, which gives it a faster rate of fire but creates a critical vulnerability. Charlie listened intently as Sarah detailed the tank's capabilities and weaknesses. Its frontal armor could withstand 105mm rounds at most ranges, but the side armor was more vulnerable. The autoloader system created a dangerous ammunition storage arrangement that could lead to catastrophic detonation if penetrated. Your best bet is to engage from the flanks, Sarah advised. The T-72 has poor gun depression, limiting its ability to fire downhill. Its reverse speed is also significantly slower than the M60s. Charlie nodded, absorbing the information. What can you tell me about who's behind this? Sarah's expression darkened. That's where it gets complicated. She pulled out a photograph of a stern-looking man with sharp features and cold eyes. Viktor Zakharov, former commander in the Soviet 4th Guards Tank Army, defected to the United States in 1982. Charlie studied the photograph. A defector? Why would he steal Soviet tanks? Because we betrayed him, Sarah said grimly. Zakharov brought invaluable intelligence with him when he defected. Technical specifications, Soviet battle plans, command structures. But when his family tried to follow, they were intercepted. His wife and 2 daughters were killed. By the Soviets? Sarah hesitated. The official story is yes. The truth is less clear. There are indications it might have been a CIA operation gone wrong. Either way, Zakharov blamed the U.S. government for failing to protect them. He disappeared 3 years ago. Charlie felt a chill. A former Soviet tank commander with a personal vendetta, now commanding Soviet tanks on American soil. It was a nightmare scenario. How good is he? Sarah's answer was immediate and chilling. He commanded a tank battalion that destroyed 14 American-made Israeli tanks in less than 20 minutes during training exercises, without losing a single T-72. Charlie absorbed this sobering information. They weren't facing amateurs. They were facing a highly trained, experienced tank commander with intimate knowledge of both Soviet and American tactics. Is there anything else I should know? Charlie asked. Sarah closed the folder. Just one thing. Zakharov isn't just tactically brilliant. He's ruthless. During his service in Afghanistan, his unit was notorious for showing no mercy. If you engage him, don't expect surrender to be an option. After Sarah left, Charlie returned to his maps with new perspective. This wouldn't be a simple operation against untrained terrorists. This was war against a determined, capable enemy led by a man with nothing to lose. The following morning, Charlie assembled his hand-picked crews in a secure briefing room at Fort Hood. 5 tank commanders, representing the best the 1st Armored Division had to offer. Each would lead a crew of 3, gunner, loader, and driver. 20 men in total, tasked with a mission most Americans would never know about. Gentlemen, Charlie began, his voice solemn, what I'm about to tell you is classified top secret. He outlined the situation, explaining the threat posed by Zakharov and his stolen T-72s. The room was silent as the gravity of the mission sank in. We'll be transporting our tanks to Fort Bliss tonight, Charlie continued. From there, we'll establish a forward operating base near the border with New Mexico. Our first priority is reconnaissance. We need to locate Zakharov's base of operations and determine his intentions. First Lieutenant Marcus Reed, commander of Charlie's second tank, raised his hand. Sir, what's our rules of engagement? It was a critical question. They would be operating on American soil, not a foreign battlefield. We are authorized to use lethal force only if fired upon, Charlie answered. This is still America, and these are still civilians, regardless of their weapons. Our primary objective is to locate and monitor. Engagement is a last resort. The briefing continued as Charlie detailed the operation plan. They would move in two elements, a reconnaissance team to locate the enemy and a strike team to engage if necessary. Charlie would lead the strike team personally. As the tank commanders filed out to prepare their crews, Tommy lingered behind. Something on your mind, Sergeant? Charlie asked. Tommy nodded, his expression troubled. With all due respect, sir, I've never faced a T-72 in real combat. None of us have. Charlie understood the concern. Training exercises were one thing, actual combat was another entirely. Neither has Zakharov faced M60s in real combat, Charlie replied. He trained against them, like we trained against T-72s. The difference will be in the crews, not the tanks. Tommy didn't seem entirely convinced. His autoloader can fire 3 rounds in the time it takes Martinez to load 2. And the autoloader can't think, Charlie countered. It can't adapt. It can't make the split-second decision to load heat instead of sabot when the situation changes. Trust your training, Tommy. Trust your crew. That evening, under cover of darkness, 5 M60A3 Patton tanks were loaded onto heavy transport vehicles. Their desert camouflage patterns, recently applied, helped conceal them as they began the journey to Fort Bliss, Texas, near the New Mexico border. The crews followed in separate vehicles, maintaining operational security. During the long drive, Charlie sat next to Tommy in one of the transport SUVs. The tank gunner had been with Charlie for 3 years, longer than any other crew member. Tommy had grown up in Detroit, the son of an auto worker. He had an intuitive understanding of machinery and an almost supernatural ability to sense when something wasn't right with the tank's systems. Tell me about your new loader, Charlie said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Martinez, he seems young. Tommy nodded. 22, fresh out of training. But he's good, Captain, really good. Fastest hands I've seen, and he doesn't get rattled under pressure. What's his story? His father served in Vietnam, tank commander, like you. Came home with a Bronze Star and half his body burned when his tank hit a mine. Martinez enlisted to follow in his footsteps. Charlie nodded, understanding the young man's motivation. And Johnson, your new driver? Former NASCAR mechanic, Tommy said with a slight smile. Joined the Army when his team lost sponsorship. Man can make a 60-ton tank dance like a ballerina. Charlie was reassured. A tank crew needed to operate as a single organism, each member instinctively understanding the others. It took time to build that level of cohesion, but starting with skilled individuals made the process faster. What about you, Tommy? Charlie asked. You're due for promotion to staff sergeant. You could have your own tank by now. Tommy shrugged. I'm where I belong, sir, behind the gun. Charlie understood. Some men found their purpose in a particular role and excelled there. Tommy was a natural gunner, perhaps the best in the division. His ability to acquire and hit targets under stress was remarkable. What do you think our chances are? Tommy asked after another stretch of silence. Against Zakharov. Charlie considered the question carefully. On paper, the T-72 has advantages over the M60, better frontal armor, more powerful gun, lower profile. But tanks don't fight on paper. They fight on battlefields, with terrain and weather and 1,000 other factors. He paused, watching the night landscape pass outside the window. And most importantly, they're crewed by men. Men with courage and fear, skill and flaws. That's where we'll win, Tommy, not with our tanks, but with our men. The convoy arrived at Fort Bliss shortly after dawn. The base was humming with activity, but their arrival was met with minimal fanfare. Colonel Williams had arranged for a secluded section of the base to be reserved for their operation, away from the routine training and administrative areas. As the tanks were unloaded and moved to a secure hangar, Charlie reported to the base commander for a situation update. The news wasn't good. Satellite reconnaissance has confirmed at least 6 T-72 tanks at a compound 50 miles northwest of here, the commander explained, pointing to a location on a large map. The area is remote, primarily used for cattle grazing, with a few abandoned mining operations. Charlie studied the location. It was tactically sound, far from population centers, with good visibility in most directions, and multiple potential escape routes. Any indication of their intentions? Charlie asked. None yet. They appear to be conducting some kind of training exercises, maneuvering the tanks in formation, practicing firing procedures. Charlie frowned. They're preparing for something. That's our assessment as well. We've established a reconnaissance post on a ridge overlooking their compound. Your intelligence liaison is already there. Charlie raised an eyebrow. Sarah Danvers. The commander nodded. Lieutenant Colonel Danvers arrived yesterday. She insisted on performing initial reconnaissance personally. Charlie wasn't surprised. Sarah struck him as the type who preferred first-hand information over second-hand reports. After the briefing, Charlie rejoined his crews as they performed maintenance checks on their tanks. Despite the long journey, the M60s had arrived in good condition. The mechanics at Fort Bliss, briefed on the classified operation, had prepared additional parts and ammunition. Charlie gathered his tank commanders for a tactical briefing, using satellite imagery to explain their approach. We'll establish our forward operating base here, he said, indicating a position 18 miles from Zakharov's compound. Close enough for rapid response, far enough to avoid detection. I want round-the-clock surveillance. 2-man teams rotating every 6 hours. He outlined patrol routes, communication protocols, and emergency procedures. Every detail was meticulously planned, but Charlie knew that no plan survived first contact with the enemy. Lieutenant Reed, your tank and Sergeant Miller's will form the reconnaissance element. Captain Sanders, your tank and Lieutenant Jackson's will join mine in the strike element. Questions? There were none. Each commander understood their role and the high stakes involved. One final note, Charlie added. We're operating on American soil. These may be terrorists, but they're on our turf. Every action we take will be scrutinized if this goes public. Follow ROE to the letter. Dismissed. As the commanders dispersed, Charlie turned his attention to preparing his own tank. Steel Justice had been with him for 3 years through countless training exercises. Now, for the first time, it might fire its gun in actual combat. Charlie climbed into the commander's cupola, settling into the familiar space. The interior of an M60 was cramped, with every inch of space utilized for equipment, ammunition, or controls. It smelled of metal, oil, and sweat, a combination Charlie had come to associate with readiness. Tommy joined him, climbing into the gunner's position and running system checks on the fire control computer and thermal sight. All systems nominal, Captain, Tommy reported. Sight alignment is perfect. Charlie nodded, continuing his own checks of the commander's independent thermal viewer and communication systems. Below, Martinez inspected the ammunition storage, while Johnson ran diagnostics on the engine and transmission. Charlie felt a familiar calm settling over him. The pre-battle routine, the meticulous preparation, centered him. Inside his tank, with his crew, roles were clear and actions decisive. It was outside, in the ambiguities of politics and classified operations, that things became complicated. That evening, Charlie led 3 tanks to their forward operating base, leaving 2 at Fort Bliss as a reserve force. The journey took them through increasingly rugged terrain, following dry riverbeds and natural depressions to minimize their visibility. The forward base was established in a box canyon, providing natural concealment from aerial observation. Camouflage netting further obscured the tanks from satellite surveillance. Communications were kept to a minimum, using secure channels and coded language. Charlie took the first reconnaissance shift himself, accompanied by Tommy. They departed on foot shortly after nightfall, carrying night vision equipment, communications gear, and sidearms. The hike to the observation post was arduous, covering 7 miles of rocky terrain under the weight of their equipment. They reached the ridge shortly before midnight. The observation post was a natural cave in the hillside, expanded and reinforced to provide protection while maintaining a clear view of Zakharov's compound in the valley below. Sarah Danvers was waiting for them, her face illuminated by the soft glow of monitoring equipment. Captain Harmon, she greeted them. Right on schedule. Charlie nodded, taking a position beside her and adjusting his night vision binoculars to study the compound. It was larger than he had expected, with multiple structures surrounding a central area where the tanks were parked. Guards patrolled the perimeter, and floodlights illuminated key areas. "What's your assessment?" he asked Sarah. "They're well organized and disciplined," she replied. "Guards rotate every 2 hours, maintaining full perimeter coverage. The tanks are maintained daily. They've been test firing on a range they established 2 miles east of the compound." Charlie counted 6 T-72 tanks in the central area. "You said there were 8 tanks total?" "2 are in that large hangar," Sarah explained, pointing to a structure on the eastern side of the compound. "They appear to be installing some kind of modifications." This was concerning news. "What kind of modifications?" "Unknown. They're keeping that building heavily guarded. No one enters or exits without direct authorization from Zakharov himself." Charlie studied the layout of the compound, identifying potential weaknesses and approach vectors. The natural terrain provided good defensive positions, but also created choke points that could be exploited in an attack. "Have you identified Zakharov?" Charlie asked. Sarah pointed to a smaller building separated from the others. "That's his quarters. He emerges every morning at precisely 0600, inspects the tanks, then conducts briefings with his commanders." Tommy, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Those aren't normal terrorists. Their movement patterns, the way they maintain formation, they're military trained." Sarah nodded. "Good observation, Sergeant. Most of them are former Soviet bloc military, East Germans, Czechs, a few Russians. Mercenaries hired for their tank expertise." Charlie felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't a ragtag group of extremists. It was a professional military force operating on American soil. "What's their objective?" he asked. "Why go to all this trouble to assemble tanks in the New Mexico desert?" Sarah's expression was grim. "That's what worries me. There's no obvious target nearby, no major cities within tank driving range, no military bases they could realistically expect to overcome. Unless the tanks aren't the weapon," Charlie said thoughtfully, "they're the delivery system." Sarah looked at him sharply. "Explain. What if they're planning to load the tanks with something else? Chemical weapons, biological agents, nuclear material? Drive right into a population center where conventional defenses wouldn't expect tanks." The possibility hung in the air between them, a chilling scenario that would explain the mysterious modifications. "We need to get a closer look at those modified tanks," Charlie decided. "Tonight." Sarah shook her head. "Too risky. The compound is well guarded, especially that hangar." "Not the compound," Charlie clarified. "The test range. You said they've been test firing 2 miles east. If they've been testing the modified tanks, there might be evidence there." It was a reasonable suggestion. The test range would be less guarded, especially at night. "I'll go," Tommy volunteered. "I can identify modifications to the firing system better than anyone." Charlie considered this. "We'll both go. Sarah, can you maintain observation here and alert us if there's any activity at the compound?" Sarah nodded. "I'll have a quick reaction force on standby if you run into trouble." Under the cover of darkness, Charlie and Tommy made their way down from the ridge and across the desert floor toward the test range. They moved slowly, careful to avoid triggering any perimeter sensors or alerting guards. The test range came into view after an hour of cautious advance. Shell casings and impact craters scarred the landscape, evidence of recent firing exercises. Charlie and Tommy split up to cover more ground, staying in communication via whispered radio transmissions. "Captain, you need to see this," Tommy called after 20 minutes of searching. Charlie joined him at what appeared to be a target area. Several vehicles had been positioned as targets, now riddled with shell impacts. But these weren't normal penetrations. "Look at the entry wounds," Tommy said, shining a red-filtered flashlight on one of the holes. "Clean entry, minimal fragmentation. But the exit wounds were massive, with catastrophic damage extending well beyond the expected zone." "Depleted uranium penetrators wouldn't do this," Charlie said, examining the damage pattern. "This looks almost like heat rounds that detonate after penetration," Tommy finished his thought. "Like they've combined the penetration capability of sabot rounds with the explosive effect of heat." It was an alarming development. Such ammunition would be devastating against armored vehicles, including tanks. "There's more," Tommy said, leading Charlie to another target area. Here, the damage was even more disturbing. The target vehicles showed no external penetration, but had been destroyed from within, as if they had spontaneously combusted. "What could cause this?" Charlie wondered aloud. "I don't know," Tommy admitted. "But whatever it is, it defeated the armor without physically penetrating it." Charlie took photographs using a specially equipped camera, documenting the unusual damage patterns. As they continued their investigation, a new discovery raised the stakes further. In a makeshift bunker area, they found radiation warning symbols and specialized handling equipment. Tommy used a radiation detector from their kit to confirm their fears. Low-level radiation, he reported grimly. Not immediately dangerous, but definitely present. Charlie's mind raced with the implications. Zakharov wasn't just modifying conventional ammunition. He was developing some kind of radiological weapon, perhaps designed to contaminate target areas after destroying them. Their investigation was cut short by an urgent radio call from Sarah. "Captain, you need to evacuate immediately." Her voice came through clearly, despite the low volume. "Patrol vehicle heading toward the test range, ETA 3 minutes." Charlie and Tommy quickly gathered their equipment and retreated, using a dry riverbed for cover as they made their way back toward the observation post. Behind them, they could see the headlights of the patrol vehicle sweeping across the test range. They made it back to the observation post shortly before dawn, sharing their disturbing findings with Sarah. Her face grew increasingly troubled as they described the unusual ammunition effects and radiation readings. "This changes everything," she said. "If Zakharov has developed radiological tank rounds, the potential for civilian casualties is astronomical." Charlie agreed. "We need to report this immediately and accelerate our timetable. Whatever Zakharov is planning, we can't afford to let those tanks leave the compound." As the first light of dawn broke over the desert, Charlie used a secure satellite phone to contact Colonel Williams at Fort Bliss. He outlined their discoveries and recommended an immediate strike authorization. Williams's response was not what Charlie had expected. "Request denied, Captain," Williams said, his voice firm. "The situation has become too politically sensitive. We need absolute confirmation before engaging." Charlie was stunned. "Sir, with respect, we have evidence of radiation at the test site. Zakharov is developing weapons of mass destruction." "Evidence isn't proof, Captain," Williams replied. "I have orders from above. Continue surveillance. Do not engage unless fired upon. Is that clear?" Charlie's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir. Crystal clear." After ending the call, Charlie turned to find Sarah watching him intently. "They're not going to authorize a strike, are they?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. Charlie shook his head. "Politics. Someone up the chain is worried about the optics of American tanks firing on American soil." "Even if those Americans are terrorists with radioactive tank rounds?" Tommy asked incredulously. "Especially then," Sarah said grimly. "A conventional terrorist can be explained. This would raise too many questions. How did Zakharov acquire radiological material? How did 8 Soviet tanks end up in New Mexico without anyone noticing? The political fallout would be nuclear, figuratively speaking." Charlie gazed down at the compound, where activity was increasing as the morning progressed. Zakharov would be emerging soon for his daily inspection. "So we wait," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "We watch them prepare for an attack that could kill thousands, and we do nothing." "For now," Sarah agreed, "but there's another option. If we can capture evidence of their intention to use these weapons, irrefutable proof, that might break the political logjam." It was a long shot, but it was better than doing nothing. Charlie assigned rotating surveillance teams to monitor the compound continuously, looking for any indication of Zakharov's plans or timeline. 3 days passed with little change in the situation. The tanks continued their training exercises, performing increasingly complex maneuvers that suggested preparation for a coordinated attack. The 2 modified tanks remained in the hangar, emerging only for brief test firings before returning to seclusion. On the 4th day, Charlie was awakened from a brief rest by Tommy shaking his shoulder urgently. "Captain, you need to see this," Tommy said, his voice tense. Charlie followed him to the observation post, where Sarah was monitoring a flurry of activity in the compound. "They're preparing to move," she reported, handing Charlie the binoculars. "All tanks are being fueled and loaded with ammunition. Supply trucks arrived an hour ago." Through the binoculars, Charlie could see Zakharov supervising the operation personally, moving from tank to tank with purpose. The modified tanks had emerged from the hangar, now integrated with the others. "Do we have any indication of their target?" Charlie asked. Sarah hesitated, then produced a map with a route marked in red. "One of our surveillance drones picked up this map in Zakharov's quarters through a window. It shows a route leading to White Sands." Charlie studied the map with growing alarm. White Sands was home to a missile range, but more importantly, it contained storage facilities for various weapon systems and, potentially, nuclear materials. If he's planning to hit White Sands with those modified rounds, Charlie didn't need to finish the thought. Everyone understood the catastrophic implications. "We need to move," Charlie decided. "Prepare the tanks for immediate deployment. I'll make one more attempt to get authorization. Charlie's call to Colonel Williams was brief and tense. Despite the new intelligence, authorization for a preemptive strike was still denied. Williams ordered Charlie to maintain surveillance and report if the tanks actually began moving toward White Sands. After ending the call, Charlie stood in silence for a long moment, weighing his options and responsibilities. As a soldier, he was bound by the chain of command. As an American, he was sworn to protect his country from all threats, foreign and domestic. "What are your orders, Captain?" Tommy asked, sensing Charlie's internal conflict. Charlie made his decision. "Prepare the tanks for combat. We're moving into blocking positions along the route to White Sands." "Without authorization?" Sarah asked, though there was no judgment in her voice. "Sometimes you have to disobey in order to fulfill your oath," Charlie replied. "If I'm wrong, I'll face a court-martial. If I'm right, we'll prevent a catastrophe." Sarah nodded in understanding. "I'll coordinate from here. The observation post has direct communication with Fort Bliss if the situation changes." Charlie and Tommy returned to the forward base, where the other tank crews were already preparing for deployment. Charlie gathered the commanders for a final briefing, explaining the situation and his decision to act without explicit authorization. "I won't order any of you to follow me," Charlie concluded. "This is my decision, and I'll bear the consequences alone if necessary. Anyone who wants to stand down can do so now without prejudice." Not a single commander moved. Their faces showed determination and resolve. "We're with you, Captain," Lieutenant Reed said, speaking for all of them. "All the way." Charlie felt a surge of pride in his men. This was why he had chosen to remain with the tanks instead of pursuing a staff position. The brotherhood forged in steel was unbreakable. "Mount up," Charlie ordered. "We'll establish a blocking position here." He indicated a narrow pass on the map, where the route to White Sands funneled through a natural choke point. "Defensive formation, hold down positions. We hold until relieved or ordered to withdraw." The tanks roared to life, their diesel engines breaking the desert silence. Charlie climbed into Steel Justice, settling into the commander's position as Tommy took his place at the gunner station. Martinez loaded the main gun with a sabot round, while Johnson guided the massive machine out of the forward base. As they moved toward the blocking position, Charlie keyed his radio to address all crews. "Gentlemen, what we do today may never appear in any official record. There will be no medals, no public recognition, but make no mistake, this is what we train for. This is why we wear the uniform. Whatever happens, I'm proud to serve with each of you." The 5 M60A3 Patton tanks took up positions overlooking the pass, using the natural terrain for cover while maintaining clear fields of fire. They were outnumbered, facing 8 T-72s with potentially superior firepower. But they had the advantage of position and preparation. As the sun climbed higher in the desert sky, Charlie scanned the horizon through his binoculars, watching for the dust cloud that would signal the approach of Zakharov's tanks. The waiting was always the hardest part, the quiet moments before the storm when doubt could creep in. Tommy's voice broke the silence. "Do you think we're doing the right thing, Captain?" Charlie lowered his binoculars, considering the question carefully. "I believe we are. Sometimes the right thing isn't the authorized thing." Tommy nodded, returning his attention to his gun sight. "Just wanted to hear you say it, sir." Charlie understood. In the moments before battle, even the most disciplined soldiers sought reassurance that their cause was just. "Contact!" Lieutenant Reed's voice came over the radio from his forward observation position. 8 tanks moving north along the projected route. "Confirmation. It's them." Charlie felt his heart rate accelerate, the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded combat. "All tanks, stand by. Hold fire until my command. Let them enter the killing zone." He watched as the dust cloud grew larger on the horizon, eventually resolving into the distinctive silhouettes of T-72 tanks. They moved in a tight formation, maintaining tactical spacing as they approached the pass. Through his binoculars, Charlie could see the lead tank's turret and the figure standing in the commander's cupola. Zakharov himself leading from the front. Charlie felt a grudging respect for the man, even as he prepared to engage him in combat. "Range 2,000 meters in closing," Tommy reported from the gunner's position. "I have a clear shot at the lead tank." "Hold fire," Charlie ordered. "Let them commit to the pass." The T-72s continued their advance, seemingly unaware of the ambush awaiting them. At 1,500 meters, they began to enter the narrow confines of the pass, where their ability to maneuver would be restricted. "All tanks, prepare to engage," Charlie ordered. "Target assignment as follows. Steel Justice, lead tank. Reed, second in formation. Sanders, third. Jackson, fourth. Miller, fifth. We'll reassess after initial volley. Each commander acknowledged their assignments. The tension in the air was palpable as the T-72s moved deeper into the pass. At 1,200 meters, Charlie gave the order that would change everything. All tanks, fire! 5 105mm guns roared in unison, sending armor-piercing rounds downrange at supersonic speed. The valley echoed with the thunderous report, a sound that had never before been heard in combat on American soil. Through his sight, Charlie watched as 4 of the 5 rounds found their marks. The lead tank, Zakharov's command vehicle, took a direct hit but continued moving, the round having failed to penetrate its frontal armor. 3 other T-72s were hit, 2 catastrophically, erupting in fireballs as their ammunition detonated. "Reload! Heat!" Charlie ordered, switching to high-explosive anti-tank rounds that might be more effective against the T-72's frontal armor. The surviving T-72s reacted with professional precision, spreading out as much as the narrow pass allowed and returning fire. 125mm rounds whistled overhead or impacted nearby, sending showers of rock and dirt into the air. "Miller's tank is hit!" came a frantic call over the radio. "Direct penetration. Tank disabled." Charlie grimaced, first blood to Zakharov. "Miller, status of crew?" "All alive. Evacuating now," came the response, a relief amid the chaos. The battle intensified as both sides adjusted to the reality of combat. The American M60s had the advantage of prepared positions and elevation, while the Soviet T-72s had superior frontal armor and firepower. Charlie directed his tanks to focus fire on individual targets, maximizing their chances of penetration. One by one, the T-72s were hit, some disabled, others destroyed outright in catastrophic ammunition explosions. But Zakharov proved why he had been feared as a tank commander. His remaining tanks executed a perfectly coordinated flanking maneuver, using a small ridge for cover as they attempted to outflank the American position. "Reed, Sanders, shift fire right," Charlie ordered. "They're trying to get around our flank." The battle had devolved into chaos, with tanks maneuvering and firing in clouds of dust and smoke. Visibility was reduced to mere glimpses of targets through thermal sights. Charlie's tank took a glancing hit from a 125mm round, the impact rocking the 60-ton vehicle and dislodging equipment inside the turret. Warning lights flashed as systems reported damage, but the tank remained operational. "Status report," Charlie called to his crew. "Turret hydraulics damaged," Tommy reported, switching to manual traverse. "Loading system intact," Martinez added. "Ready to fire." "Mobility good," Johnson confirmed from the driver's compartment. Charlie refocused on the battle. Through the smoke, he could see Zakharov's command tank, distinguished by its distinctive markings, maneuvering toward a position that would give it a shot at Reed's vulnerable flank. "Tommy, target Zakharov's tank. Heat round." "Identified," Tommy confirmed, rotating the turret manually, a much slower process without hydraulic assistance. "On the way." The 105mm gun roared again, sending a high-explosive round toward the Soviet tank. The shot struck the T-72's track, immobilizing it but leaving its turret operational. Zakharov's tank returned fire immediately, the 125mm shell narrowly missing Charlie's position and impacting the rocks behind him. Fragments of stone peppered the tank's hull with metallic pings. The battle had reached its crescendo, with both sides fully committed. 3 of the 8 Soviet tanks had been destroyed, with 2 more immobilized. But the Americans had lost Miller's tank, and Reed's was reporting significant damage to its fire control system. Charlie knew they needed to end this quickly. Without authorization, they could only justify their actions if they prevented Zakharov from reaching White Sands. Every minute the battle continued increased the risk of civilian casualties or political complications. "All tanks, focus fire on Zakharov's command vehicle," Charlie ordered. "Heat rounds, maximum effect." 3 American tanks turned their guns toward the immobilized Soviet command tank, which continued to fire defiantly. The T-72's turret rotated rapidly, trying to target all threats at once. "Fire when ready," Charlie commanded. 3 105-meter guns fired within seconds of each other, their rounds converging on Zakharov's tank from different angles. The combined impact was devastating, breaching the armor and igniting the ammunition carousel inside the hull. The T-72 exploded in a massive fireball, its turret blown completely off the hull by the force of the internal detonation. The remaining Soviet tanks, seeing their commander destroyed, began to withdraw, using smoke grenades to cover their retreat. "Hold position," Charlie ordered his tanks. "Maintain target tracking, but hold fire unless they re-engage." The battlefield fell eerily silent, broken only by the crackle of burning tanks and the ticking of cooling metal. Charlie surveyed the scene through his binoculars, counting 3 destroyed T-72s and 2 immobilized, with 3 retreating. His own force had lost 1 tank disabled, with another severely damaged. "All stations report casualties," Charlie requested. The reports came in. Miller's crew had survived with minor injuries. Reed's gunner had suffered a concussion from the impact of a round on their turret. No fatalities among the American forces. Charlie felt relief washing over him, tempered by the knowledge that the battle wasn't truly over. They had stopped Zakharov, but the political battle was just beginning. "Steel justice to all stations," Charlie transmitted. "Well done. Maintain defensive positions. The enemy may regroup and return." As the dust settled and the adrenaline began to ebb, Charlie became aware of a new sound: helicopter rotors approaching from the south. Through his binoculars, he could see 3 military helicopters bearing the insignia of the United States Army. "Looks like the cavalry's finally arriving," Tommy commented dryly. Charlie nodded, already preparing his explanation for why he had engaged without authorization. It would be a difficult conversation, possibly the end of his military career. But looking at the burning Soviet tanks that would never reach White Sands with their deadly cargo, he knew he would make the same decision again. "Secure all weapons," Charlie ordered his crews, prepared to receive friendly forces. The helicopters landed at a safe distance from the battlefield. Colonel Williams emerged from the lead aircraft, accompanied by several officers Charlie didn't recognize. Their expressions were unreadable as they surveyed the destruction. Charlie dismounted from his tank and walked to meet them, removing his helmet as he approached. Whatever consequences awaited, he would face them with the same courage he had shown in battle. "Captain Harmon reporting, sir," Charlie said formally, saluting despite the dust and sweat that covered his uniform. Williams returned the salute, his face stern. "You disobeyed a direct order, Captain." "Yes, sir, I did," Charlie acknowledged without excuse or apology. Williams glanced into the burning tanks, then back to Charlie. "Intelligence intercepted communications from Zakharov's group shortly after you engaged. They were indeed targeting White Sands, specifically the nuclear storage facilities." Charlie felt vindication but kept his expression neutral. "Then I stand by my decision, sir." Williams's face remained impassive. "The official record will show that you were authorized to engage as a last resort to prevent an attack on a critical military installation. Your actions today will be classified top secret for at least 30 years. Charlie understood what Williams was offering, a cover story that would protect both Charlie's career and the political sensitivities involved. "Thank you, sir," Charlie said quietly. Williams leaned closer, his voice dropping to ensure only Charlie could hear. "Unofficially, Captain. Well done. But this conversation never happened." As Williams moved away to coordinate the recovery operation, Charlie turned back toward his tank. Tommy stood watching from the turret, a questioning look on his face. Charlie gave a small nod, and Tommy's face broke into a relieved smile. They had done what was necessary, and somehow they would be allowed to continue serving. But as Charlie surveyed the battlefield one last time, his eye caught movement near Zakharov's destroyed tank. A figure was crawling away from the wreckage, severely injured, but alive. "Tommy!" Charlie called in alarm. "Contact at Zakharov's tank!" Tommy swung the main gun toward the crawling figure, but before he could fire, an explosion erupted from within the destroyed T-72. Secondary ammunition cooked off, sending shrapnel flying in all directions. Charlie watched in horror as Tommy, exposed in the turret, was struck by multiple fragments. The gunner collapsed backward, disappearing into the tank's interior. "Medic!" Charlie screamed, running toward his tank. "Man down!" Charlie reached the tank and climbed frantically into the turret, finding Tommy unconscious and bleeding heavily from multiple wounds. Martinez was already applying pressure to the worst injuries, his hands slick with blood. "Stay with me, Tommy," Charlie pleaded, helping to extract the injured gunner from the cramped confines of the turret. "Don't you dare die on me now." The medevac helicopter arrived minutes later, its crew working efficiently to stabilize Tommy before loading him aboard. Charlie watched helplessly as his friend and gunner was flown away, his fate uncertain. Colonel Williams appeared at Charlie's side. "We'll get him the best care possible, Captain." Charlie nodded numbly, his earlier elation at their victory now replaced by dread. The battlefield had claimed one final casualty, perhaps the one that would hit Charlie the hardest. As the cleanup operation began, Charlie found himself drawn back to Zakharov's destroyed tank. The figure he had seen crawling away was nowhere to be found, despite the scorched earth surrounding the wreckage. Had Zakharov somehow survived? The thought was troubling, but there was no time to dwell on it now. The remaining Soviet tanks had disappeared into the desert, and recovery teams were already moving to secure the battlefield. Whatever happened next, the immediate threat had been neutralized. 3 weeks later, Charlie sat in his office at Fort Bliss, staring at the promotion orders on his desk. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Harmon. The Battle of Lost Heaven, as it had come to be known among the few who knew it had occurred, had accelerated his career rather than ending it. The official story was that his company had conducted a classified training exercise that had resulted in several equipment failures but no casualties. Tommy had survived his injuries, but barely. He remained in critical condition at Walter Reed Medical Center, his prognosis uncertain. Charlie had visited him once, but the sight of his friend, unresponsive and connected to a maze of tubes and wires, had been almost unbearable. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah Danvers entered without waiting for a response, closing the door firmly behind her. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. Charlie gestured for her to sit, setting aside his promotion orders. "What kind of problem?" "Zakharov survived." The words hit Charlie like a physical blow. "That's impossible. I saw his tank explode." Sarah placed a folder on his desk, opening it to reveal surveillance photographs. These were taken 2 days ago in Ciudad Juarez, across the border in Mexico. Charlie examined the photos. They showed a man with severe burn scars on one side of his face, but the other side was unmistakably Zakharov. "He survived the initial explosion," Sarah explained. "Our best guess is that he was blown clear of the tank when the ammunition cooked off. Local ranchers found him and transported him across the border for medical treatment." "And we're just finding this out now?" Charlie asked, incredulous. "He's been careful, using false identities, paying cash. But 2 days ago, he met with this man." She pointed to another figure in the photographs. "Dmitry Kolkov, former KGB, now freelance arms dealer." Charlie frowned. What would Zakharov want with an arms dealer? "We destroyed his tanks." "Not all of them," Sarah reminded him. 3 T-72s escaped the engagement. "But more importantly, we never found the modified ammunition. The specialized radioactive material is still out there." Charlie leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. "You think he's planning another attack?" It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. "We believe so, but this time he knows we're on to him. He'll be more careful, more strategic." "What do you need from me?" Charlie asked, though he already knew the answer. "We're forming a special task force to track and neutralize Zakharov," Sarah said. "Off the books, completely deniable. I need someone who understands how he thinks, someone who's faced him before. I need you, Charlie." Charlie hesitated. His promotion would put him on track for a brigade command, possibly even a star someday. Taking on this assignment would mean stepping off that path, potentially forever. "What about my new command?" he asked. "Someone else will step in. The official story will be that you've been reassigned to a classified NATO liaison position in Europe." Charlie thought of Tommy, lying in a hospital bed fighting for his life. He thought of the burning tanks in the New Mexico desert and the threat that remained. "When do we start?" he asked. Sarah's relief was evident. "Immediately, pack a bag. We fly to El Paso tonight, then cross into Juarez tomorrow. We need to pick up Zakharov's trail before it goes cold." As Sarah left to make the arrangements, Charlie opened his desk drawer and removed his sidearm. He checked it methodically, a ritual that had become second nature over years of service. This wasn't the type of mission he had trained for as a tank commander, but the principles remained the same. Identify the threat, develop a plan, execute with precision. Zakharov had survived their first encounter. Charlie was determined to ensure there wouldn't be a third. The El Paso sun beat down mercilessly as Charlie and Sarah prepared to cross the border into Mexico. They traveled light, each with a small duffel bag containing civilian clothes, basic necessities, and concealed weapons. Their covers were simple: American business partners looking to invest in the growing manufacturing sector in Juarez. "Our contact will meet us at a cafe 2 blocks from the border crossing," Sarah explained as they walked toward the pedestrian entrance. "He's a former DEA asset, now working freelance intelligence. He claims to have information on Zakharov's whereabouts." Charlie nodded, scanning the crowded crossing for any signs of surveillance. "Can we trust him?" "About 60%, Sarah replied honestly. He's been reliable in the past, but money talks louder than loyalty in his world. We'll verify anything he tells us. The border crossing was uneventful, their American passports and tourist cards processed without incident. Juarez sprawled before them, a city of contrasts where opulent wealth existed alongside desperate poverty. They made their way through crowded streets to a small cafe with peeling paint and a faded sign. Their contact was already waiting, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and suspicious eyes. He introduced himself only as Miguel, offering no handshake as they sat down. "You're looking for the Russian?" he said without preamble, his accent thick but his English fluent. Sarah nodded. "We're willing to pay for information." Miguel glanced around the cafe before responding. "He is staying at a compound outside the city. Very secure, many guards. He meets with people only in public places, never at the compound." "What kind of people?" Charlie asked. "Military types, ex-soldiers, mercenaries, and technicians, people with scientific knowledge." Charlie and Sarah exchanged glances. Zakharov was rebuilding his force and possibly continuing his weapons development. "When is his next meeting?" Sarah asked. Miguel consulted a small notebook. "Tomorrow night, he meets with a physicist from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, a specialist in nuclear engineering." That confirmed their fears. Zakharov was still pursuing his radiological weapons. "Where?" Charlie pressed. "A restaurant called El Toro Negro on the north side of the city, 9 o'clock. Sarah slid an envelope across the table. "Half now, half when we confirm the information is accurate." Miguel pocketed the envelope without counting the contents. "He is different now," he added as he stood to leave. "The fire changed him. He is more careful, but also more ruthless. Be warned." After their contact departed, Charlie and Sarah remained at the cafe, planning their next moves. "We need surveillance on the restaurant," Charlie said, "and we need to know more about this physicist he's meeting." Sarah nodded. "I'll set it up. We also need backup. If Zakharov is rebuilding his force, we can't handle this alone." "Who do you have in mind?" "I have 2 operatives already in Mexico City, former Delta Force, now working with our Special Activities Division. They can be here by tomorrow morning." Charlie considered this. "Good, but we need someone who understands tanks and weapon systems. Someone who can help us identify what Zakharov is planning." "I know just the person," Sarah said, a slight smile playing at her lips. "But you're not going to like it." 6 hours later, Charlie stood at the airport in El Paso watching a private jet taxi to a stop on the tarmac. The passenger door opened and a familiar figure descended the steps. Captain Michael Sanders, one of Charlie's tank commanders from the Battle of Lost Heaven, approached with a broad smile. "Lieutenant Colonel Harmon, sir, or should I call you Charlie now that we're doing this cloak and dagger stuff?" Charlie returned the smile despite his reservations. "Sanders, good to see you." Sanders had been an excellent tank commander, one of the best in the division. But he was also known for being reckless, willing to bend rules to accomplish his objectives. In a conventional military operation, Charlie would have concerns. In their current situation, Sanders' unorthodox approach might be exactly what they needed. "Briefing me in the car?" Sanders asked as they walked to the parking lot. "Once we're across the border," Charlie confirmed. "Short version, Zakharov survived, and he's planning something new. We need to find out what, then stop it." Sanders whistled low, and here I thought life in Garrison was getting boring. "Lead the way, sir." The next evening found Charlie, Sarah, and Sanders conducting surveillance on El Toro Negro restaurant from a rented apartment across the street. The 2 Delta operators, introduced only as Mason and Reeves, had established a secondary observation post in a vehicle down the block. "Target approaching," Mason's voice came through their earpieces. Black SUV, tinted windows, 2 vehicles and escort. Charlie adjusted his binoculars, focusing on the small convoy as it pulled to a stop in front of the restaurant. Security personnel emerged first, scanning the area before opening the rear door of the center vehicle. Zakharov stepped out, his movements stiff but purposeful. The right side of his face was severely scarred, the skin waxy and discolored from burn treatment. He wore a tailored suit that failed to completely disguise his physical deterioration. "Definitely our guy," Charlie confirmed, "injured but mobile." "Second target approaching," Reeves reported. "Silver sedan, single occupant." The sedan parked nearby, and a middle-aged man in academic attire emerged, clutching a leather briefcase to his chest. He entered the restaurant without security, looking nervous and out of place. "That's our physicist," Sarah said. "Dr. Alejandro Vega, according to his university ID." I'd give a lot to hear that conversation, Sanders mused. Sarah smiled. That can be arranged. She produced a small device from her equipment bag. Directional microphone. It won't give us everything, but if they sit near the windows, we might get lucky. For the next hour, they monitored the meeting, catching fragments of conversation when the restaurant noise permitted. Most of it was in Russian or Spanish, but Sarah's fluency in both languages allowed her to translate the key points. They're discussing radiation dispersal patterns, and she reported, her expression grim. Vega is explaining how different radioactive isotopes behave when aerosolized. Zakharov is asking about effective radius and long-term contamination. He's still planning a dirty bomb, Charlie concluded, but he's lost his delivery system. The tanks are gone. Maybe not all of them, Sanders interjected. Remember, 3 T-72s escaped the engagement, and even if he doesn't have the tanks, he could have salvaged the modified ammunition. Charlie nodded, considering the possibilities. Either way, he needs a new target. White Sands is too heavily defended now that we know his intentions. There's something else, Sarah said, adjusting the microphone. Vega just mentioned a timeline, something happening in 2 weeks. Before they could hear more details, Zakharov and Vega stood to leave, moving away from the window and out of the microphone's range. They watched as the two men departed separately, Zakharov returning to his convoy of vehicles. We follow Vega, Charlie decided. He's the softer target, and he knows the details of whatever Zakharov is planning. I'll take point, Sanders volunteered. Academic types usually fold pretty quickly under pressure. Charlie shook his head. No intimidation. We approach him professionally. He's a scientist, not a terrorist. Appeal to his conscience, not his fear. The team mobilized quickly, with Mason and Reeves maintaining surveillance on Zakharov while Charlie, Sarah, and Sanders followed Vega back to his hotel. They waited until he entered his room, then approached casually, as if they were fellow guests. Sarah knocked on the door, assuming a friendly demeanor. When Vega answered, his expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he recognized Sarah from the restaurant. Dr. Vega, she said pleasantly, we need to talk about your meeting with Viktor Zakharov. The physicist attempted to close the door, but Sanders smoothly inserted his foot in the gap. That's not a good idea, Doctor. We're not here to harm you, but this conversation needs to happen. Seeing no alternative, Vega reluctantly admitted them to his room. Charlie took the lead, his tone calm and authoritative. Dr. Vega, my name is Charles Harmon. I'm with United States Military Intelligence. We know you're assisting Zakharov with a radiological weapon. What we don't know is whether you understand the consequences of such an action. Vega's face paled. I was told it was for a mining operation, specialized explosives for resource extraction. And you believe that? Sanders asked incredulously. I needed the money, Vega admitted, his shoulders sagging. My research funding was cut, and my daughter needs specialized medical treatment. Zakharov offered $50,000 for a consultation. Charlie exchanged glances with Sarah. The physicist wasn't a willing accomplice. He was a desperate father. What exactly did Zakharov ask you to do? Charlie pressed. Vega hesitated, then moved to his briefcase. Sanders tensed, but the physicist only removed a folder of technical documents. He wanted calculations for dispersal patterns using these specifications. He handed the papers to Sarah. I realized during our dinner that this had nothing to do with mining, the isotopes he's working with, the dispersal methods. This is a weapon. Sarah examined the documents, her expression darkening. Cesium-137 and strontium-90, both powerful gamma emitters with long half-lives. This isn't just a dirty bomb, it's designed for maximum contamination and long-term area denial. Where is he planning to use it? Charlie asked Vega directly. He didn't say specifically, but he mentioned something about a convergence point, somewhere many people would gather 2 weeks from now. Charlie's mind raced through possibilities. A convergence point could be many things. A sports stadium, a concert venue, a political rally. Without more information, they had no way to narrow it down. Did he mention how he plans to deliver the weapon? Sarah asked. Vega shook his head. No, but I overheard his security personnel discussing vehicles being prepared. Multiple vehicles. Charlie and Sarah exchanged meaningful looks. The 3 escaped T-72 tanks were still in play. Dr. Vega, Charlie said firmly, I need you to tell me where Zakharov is staying. Lives are at stake. The physicist seemed to struggle with his conscience before responding. There's a hacienda about 30 kilometers north of the city. It used to belong to a cartel leader before he was killed. Zakharov purchased it through intermediaries. How heavily guarded is it? Sanders asked. Very. At least 20 men with military-grade weapons. And there's a large garage area that's restricted. No one is allowed inside except Zakharov and his closest associates. Charlie nodded, processing the information. Thank you, Doctor. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack your things and come with us. We'll ensure your daughter receives the medical care she needs, but you can't return to your normal life until this situation is resolved. Vega looked stricken. Are you arresting me? No, Sarah reassured him. We're protecting you. Once Zakharov realizes you've spoken to us, your life won't be worth much. Charlie knew she was right. The Cold War might be ending, but new threats were emerging from its ashes. Rogue states, terrorist organizations, former military personnel with access to dangerous knowledge and materials. The world was becoming more complex, not less. Whatever comes next, he said with quiet determination, we'll face it together. That's what soldiers do. As the morning sun illuminated the distant mountains, Charlie allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had prevented a catastrophe through courage, initiative, and teamwork, the same qualities that had served him well throughout his military career. Whatever consequences awaited, he would face them with the same resolve. The Battle of Lost Heaven had been their first encounter with this new kind of warfare. Charlie suspected it wouldn't be their last. The physicist reluctantly agreed, and within 30 minutes, they had him safely in a secure location with Mason as his guard. Charlie, Sarah, Sanders, and Reeves gathered in their improvised command center to plan their next move. We need to confirm the presence of those tanks, Charlie insisted. Without proof, we can't request official support. Aerial reconnaissance, Sanders suggested. Sarah shook her head. Too risky. If Zakharov spots a surveillance aircraft, he might accelerate his timeline. We need ground-level intelligence. I'll go, Reeves volunteered. I've got experience in close reconnaissance. I can get eyes on the compound without being detected. Charlie considered the offer. Not alone. Sanders, you go with him. Your tank expertise will be valuable in identifying the vehicles and any modifications. And us? Sarah asked. We need to figure out Zakharov's target, Charlie replied. This convergence point happening in 2 weeks. We'll work with Vega to narrow down the possibilities. The team dispersed to their assignments. As Sanders and Reeves prepared for their reconnaissance mission, Charlie found himself staring at a map of the region, trying to see the situation through Zakharov's eyes. What are you planning? He murmured to himself. What target would satisfy your need for revenge? Sarah joined him, offering a cup of coffee. Any insights? Charlie accepted the coffee gratefully. Zakharov is a military strategist. He thinks in terms of maximum impact with minimal resources. 3 tanks isn't enough for a conventional attack on a hardened target, so he's looking for something softer, more vulnerable, but still significant enough to make a statement, Sarah added. And the timing is important. 2 weeks from now puts us at July 4th, Charlie realized suddenly, Independence Day. Sarah's eyes widened as the implication sank in. A symbolic target on America's most patriotic holiday. With large gatherings all across the border region, Charlie added grimly, military parades, civilian celebrations, fireworks displays, thousands of potential victims. They pored over maps and event schedules, identifying potential targets within driving distance of Zakharov's compound. The list was disturbingly long. Without knowing which specific event he's targeting, we can't protect them all, Sarah said, frustration evident in her voice. Then we have to stop him before he can launch the attack, Charlie decided. Take out his capability at the source. Their planning was interrupted by the return of Sanders and Reeves, their expressions grim but determined. We found the tanks, Sanders reported without preamble. All 3 in a converted barn about half a kilometer from the main house. They're being modified, just like before. Security? Charlie asked. Heavy, Reeves confirmed. At least 25 mercenaries with military-grade weapons. Multiple perimeter layers, motion sensors, the works. This isn't some cartel hideout, it's a military installation in disguise. Sanders spread several photographs on the table. The tanks themselves are being fitted with specialized dispensers, replacing the main guns. They're not designed to fight tanks anymore. They're delivery vehicles for the radiological agent. Charlie examined the photos carefully. Any sign of Zakharov himself? Affirmative, Reeves nodded. He's personally overseeing the modifications, and he's got additional personnel arriving daily. Scientists, technicians, more mercenaries. Timeline? Sarah asked. Based on their pace of work, I'd say 5 days until they're operational, Sanders estimated. Then they'll need to move them into position for whatever Zakharov has planned. Charlie made his decision. We can't wait for official authorization. By the time we convince Washington this is real, it will be too late. We need to hit them now while the weapons are still in one location. With what? Sarah asked practically. We're 5 people against a small army in a fortified compound. 6, came a voice from the doorway. They turned to see Dr. Vega standing there, his expression resolved. I want to help. I have information about the compound's layout and the weapon systems. Charlie nodded appreciatively. That's a start, but we need more. Sanders, what kind of local assets can we access without going through official channels? Sanders grinned. I might know some people who know some people. Former contractors now working private security in the region. Good men who don't ask too many questions when the money's right. Get them, Charlie authorized. Sarah, we need technical support. Surveillance equipment, communication gear, tactical hardware. I can access a cache in El Paso, she confirmed. Unmarked, deniable equipment maintained for exactly this kind of operation. Good. Reeves, you and Mason continue surveillance on the compound. I want to know every guard rotation, every vehicle movement, every potential weakness. As the team mobilized, Charlie returned to studying the reconnaissance photos. The modified T-72 tanks represented an evolution of Zakharov's original plan. Instead of penetrating a nuclear storage facility to create a conventional disaster, he was now planning something more insidious: the deliberate contamination of civilian populations during a patriotic celebration. The irony wasn't lost on Charlie. Tanks, designed to be the spearhead of conventional military operations, were being perverted into weapons of mass destruction and terror. It was a violation of everything Charlie believed about his profession and his country's principles. Over the next 48 hours, their operation took shape. Sanders recruited 8 former military contractors, experienced men with combat backgrounds, who asked no questions when shown photos of the modified tanks. Sarah returned from El Paso with a truckload of equipment, everything from night vision devices to encrypted communications gear. Dr. Vega provided detailed information about the radiological components, helping them identify the critical vulnerabilities in Zakharov's weapons. Charlie gathered the expanded team in their command center, now resembling a military operations room with maps, surveillance photos, and equipment spread across multiple tables. Our objective is clear, he briefed them. Neutralize Zakharov's capability to deploy radiological weapons. This means destroying the modified tanks, securing the radioactive material, and capturing or eliminating Zakharov himself. He pointed to a detailed map of the compound. We'll approach in 3 teams. Alpha Team, Hayabam Sanders, will create a diversion at the main gate. Beta Team, led by Reeves, will infiltrate from the eastern perimeter and secure the radioactive materials in the storage building identified by Dr. Vega. Charlie Team, which I'll lead with Sarah, will target the barn containing the tanks. Rules of engagement? One of the contractors asked. We're not here to create a massacre, Charlie stated firmly. Many of the personnel are technicians and support staff, not combatants. Our priority is the weapons in Zakharov. Use lethal force only when necessary, and prioritize disabling over killing when possible. The contractors exchanged skeptical glances, but nodded in acceptance. Timing is critical, Charlie continued. The operation begins at 0200 hours tomorrow morning, during the lowest guard presence identified by our surveillance. Alpha Team initiates the diversion at 0205, drawing security personnel to the main entrance. Beta and Charlie teams move simultaneously at 0207, using the diversion as cover. Sarah added a practical note. Once the shooting starts, we'll have limited time before Mexican authorities respond. Our extraction plan needs to be executed with precision. Charlie nodded agreement. Rendezvous point is here, he indicated a location 5 kilometers from the compound, with extraction vehicles standing by. If anyone is separated, make your way to the secondary rendezvous point at the abandoned gas station we identified earlier. The briefing continued with detailed assignments, communications protocols, and contingency plans. By the time they finished, every team member knew their role in the overall operation structure. As the contractors checked and prepared their equipment, Sarah pulled Charlie aside. You realize we're conducting an unauthorized military operation on foreign soil, she said quietly. Even if we succeed, there will be consequences. Charlie nodded grimly. I know, but the alternative is waiting for Zakharov to deploy weapons that could kill thousands and contaminate entire communities for decades. I'll take a court-martial over that scenario any day. Sarah studied him for a moment, then smiled. You tank commanders, always charging ahead once you've made a decision. It's what we do, Charlie replied simply. That night, as the team made final preparations, Charlie found a moment of quiet to write 2 letters. The first was to his commanding officer, taking full responsibility for the operation and absolving the others of any insubordination. The second was to Tommy, still recovering in Walter Reed. He sealed both in envelopes, giving them to Dr. Vega with instructions to mail them if the operation failed. At 0100 hours, the assault teams departed their staging area in 3 nondescript vehicles, driving separately towards Zakharov's compound. Charlie rode with Sarah and 2 contractors, his mind focused on the mission ahead. Approaching checkpoint Alpha, Sanders reported over their encrypted radio. All teams, status check. Beta team in position, Reeves confirmed. Charlie team ready? Charlie responded as their vehicle pulled to a stop in a wooded area a kilometer from the compound's eastern perimeter. The team exited the vehicle, retrieving their equipment and weapons. Charlie carried an M4 carbine with suppressor, a sidearm, and various breaching tools. They moved through the darkness with practiced efficiency, their night vision equipment turning the black Mexican night into a ghostly green landscape. At precisely 0205, the silence was shattered by a series of explosions at the compound's main gate. Sanders and Alpha Team had begun their diversion, detonating pre-placed charges and engaging the guard post with suppressed weapons fire. Diversion effective, Sanders reported, multiple tangos responding to the main gate, proceeding to Phase 2. Charlie and his team used the distraction to approach the barn containing the modified tanks. They encountered 2 guards, who were swiftly neutralized with suppressed shots. Barn secured, Charlie reported, moving to inspect the targets. Inside the cavernous structure, illuminated only by emergency lights, stood the 3 T-72 tanks. Just as Sanders had reported, their main guns had been removed, replaced with specialized dispersal systems designed to aerosolize the radioactive material. Technical diagrams and equipment littered workbenches around the vehicles. Sarah examined one of the tanks while Charlie provided security. These are nearly complete, she reported. Another day, maybe 2, and they'd be operational. Plant the charges, Charlie ordered the contractors. Focus on the dispersal systems and engine compartments. As the contractors began placing demolition charges, Charlie's radio crackled. Beta team encountering heavy resistance, Reeves reported, his voice tight with tension. Storage facility more heavily guarded than expected. Can you secure the radioactive material? Charlie asked. Negative, we're pinned down in the adjacent building. Request support. Charlie made a quick decision. Sarah, continue overseeing the demolition here. I'll take 1 man and reinforce Beta team. Before Sarah could protest, Charlie was moving, gesturing for one of the contractors to follow him. They exited the barn and moved swiftly through the compound, using the ongoing chaos at the main gate as cover. They found Reeves and his team exchanging fire with at least 10 guards positioned around a reinforced storage building. Using hand signals, Charlie directed his contractor to flank the enemy position while he provided covering fire. The maneuver worked, allowing Reeves and his team to advance closer to their objective. Charlie joined them, assessing the situation. The storage building has a reinforced door, Reeves explained. We need breaching charges to get through. Use mine, Charlie handed over his charges. Make it quick. This diversion won't last forever. As Reeves prepared the breach, Charlie maintained security, his carbine tracking any movement in the surrounding area. The night had become a chaotic symphony of gunfire, shouted orders, and the occasional explosion as the battle for the compound raged. Suddenly, Charlie's radio came alive with Sarah's urgent voice. Charlie team to all units, we have a new development. Zakharov is in the command center, and he's activated some kind of countdown. Looks like a remote detonation system. Charlie's blood ran cold. He's going to destroy the evidence. How long? Timer shows 5 minutes, Sarah replied. I'm going after him. Negative, Charlie ordered. Complete your primary mission and extract. I'll handle Zakharov. Without waiting for acknowledgement, Charlie instructed the contractor to remain with Reeves and began sprinting toward the compound's main house, where the command center was located. The building was largely deserted, most of the security personnel having responded to the various diversions. Charlie moved through empty corridors until he heard voices speaking rapid Russian from behind a closed door. Taking a deep breath, Charlie kicked the door open and entered in a combat stance, his carbine sweeping the room. 3 men were inside, Two guards and Zakharov himself standing before a computer terminal displaying a countdown timer. The guards reached for their weapons, but Charlie was faster. Two precise shots dropped them before they could fire. Zakharov turned slowly, his scarred face twisting into a grimace that might have been a smile. "Captain Harmon," he said, his accent thick but his English clear. "I wondered if it would be you." "It's Lieutenant Colonel now," Charlie replied, keeping his weapon trained on Zakharov. "Step away from the terminal." Zakharov made no move to comply. "You know, when my tank was hit that day, I had a moment of clarity as the flames engulfed me. I realized that my goal was too limited. Why contaminate one military facility when I could bring radiation to American streets? Make your children suffer as mine did?" "Your family wasn't killed by Americans," Charlie said, taking a cautious step forward. "It was a Soviet operation gone wrong. They couldn't risk you sharing more secrets." Zakharov's expression faltered momentarily. "Lies. Always lies." Sarah Danvers saw the classified reports. "Your wife and daughters were targeted by KGB operatives who feared you would reveal too much about Soviet military capabilities. They wanted to make an example of you." For a moment, doubt flickered across Zakharov's face, but then his expression hardened. "It doesn't matter now. In 4 minutes, the charges in my tanks will detonate, releasing enough radiation to make this entire area uninhabitable. A fitting preview of what would have happened on your Independence Day." Charlie's mind raced. If what Zakharov said was true, they needed to evacuate immediately. The radioactive dispersal from 3 tanks would contaminate everything for kilometers around. "There's no need for more death," Charlie said, lowering his weapon slightly. "Your grievance was never with civilians. You were a soldier, like me." "I stopped being a soldier the day I watched my family die," Zakharov replied bitterly. "Now I am simply an instrument of justice." Charlie saw movement behind Zakharov, Sarah slipping quietly through a side door, her weapon raised. He kept talking to maintain Zakharov's attention. "Justice? There's no justice in mass murder. Your family wouldn't want this legacy." Zakharov's face contorted with rage. "You dare speak of them? You know nothing of what they would want." He reached for a sidearm holstered at his waist, but before he could draw it, Sarah fired. The shot caught Zakharov in the shoulder, spinning him away from the terminal. Charlie lunged forward, tackling Zakharov to the ground and securing his weapon. Sarah moved to the terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I can't stop it," she reported tensely. "The system's locked." "How much time?" Charlie asked, securing Zakharov's hands behind his back. 3 minutes, 12 seconds. Charlie made a decision. "Alert all teams to extract immediately. Priority is distance from the compound. We'll rendezvous at the secondary location." As Sarah relayed the evacuation order, Charlie hauled Zakharov to his feet. "You're coming with us. If we survive, you'll face justice for your actions." Zakharov laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "There is no escape. The radiation will find us all." "We'll see about that," Charlie replied grimly, pushing the Russian toward the exit. They moved through the compound, collecting team members as they went. Sanders reported that Alpha Team was already clear, while Reeves and Beta Team were extracting with the radioactive material they had managed to secure. As they reached their vehicles, the countdown ticked below 2 minutes. Charlie ordered maximum speed away from the compound, their convoy racing into the desert night. 1 minute, Sarah reported from beside him, monitoring a radiation detector. "We need at least 3 kilometers to have any chance." Charlie pushed their vehicle to its limits, the engine screaming in protest as they sped down the dirt road. Zakharov sat silently in the back seat, his expression unreadable. 30 seconds, Sarah counted down. The compound was barely visible in the distance behind them when the night turned briefly to day. A massive explosion illuminated the horizon, followed by the distinctive mushroom cloud of a conventional blast. "Radiation spike," Sarah announced, watching the detector. "It's dispersing." Charlie continued driving, putting as much distance as possible between them and the contaminated zone. After 5 kilometers, Sarah reported that radiation levels had dropped to non-threatening levels for brief exposure. "The explosion contained most of it," she explained. "The tanks weren't fully loaded with the radioactive material. What Beta Team secured must have been the bulk of it." At the rendezvous point, they regrouped with the other teams. Casualties were minimal: 2 contractors with non-life-threatening injuries, and 1 with a more serious gunshot wound that Sanders was treating. "Mission accomplished, sir," Reeves reported to Charlie. "We secured approximately 80% of the radioactive material based on Dr. Vega's estimates." "And the rest?" Charlie asked. "Dispersed, but in a much smaller area than Zakharov planned. The Mexican authorities will need to quarantine the compound and surrounding area, but the contamination zone should be limited to about 1 square kilometer. Charlie nodded, relief washing over him. They had prevented a catastrophe, though not without creating a smaller one in its place. 6 months later, Charlie stood in the lobby of Walter Reed Army Medical Center, a bouquet of flowers in his hand. The past half year had been a whirlwind of classified debriefings, quiet commendations, and subtle reassignments. Just as Sarah had predicted, the official record of their Mexican operation bore little resemblance to reality, sanitized for diplomatic and political expediency. Zakharov had died in custody 2 weeks after his capture, officially from complications related to his burn injuries. Charlie suspected it was suicide, though he never received confirmation. Charlie himself had been quietly reassigned to the Pentagon, working on emerging threat assessments and counterterrorism strategies. It wasn't commanding tanks, but it was important work, using his hard-won experience to prevent future Zakharovs from succeeding. Now, after months of surgeries, rehabilitative therapy, and recovery, Tommy was finally being discharged from the hospital. Charlie had visited whenever possible, watching his friend's gradual return to health with profound relief. "Sir!" a familiar voice called out. Charlie turned to see Tommy approaching, walking with a cane but otherwise looking remarkably well. The scars on his face and neck would remain, but they were far less severe than Charlie had initially feared. "Not sir anymore, Tommy," Charlie reminded him with a smile. "Just Charlie. I'm out of your chain of command these days." They embraced, an awkward but heartfelt gesture between two men not accustomed to such displays. "Heard you've been busy," Tommy said as they walked together toward the exit. "Pentagon work? Classified stuff?" Charlie nodded. "Something like that. How much did they tell you about what happened in Mexico?" "Enough to know you finished what we started at Lost Heaven," Tommy replied. "The rest, well, I can read between the lines." Outside, Charlie helped Tommy into his car. "I've got something to show you," he said, pulling away from the curb. "It's about a 30-minute drive." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "This mysterious enough that I should be worried?" "Not this time," Charlie assured him. "This one's positive." They drove in comfortable silence, eventually turning onto a tree-lined road leading to a large building complex. As they approached, a sign came into view. "Armor Training Center, Fort Belvoir." "What's this?" Tommy asked, confused. Charlie parked the car. "Your new assignment, if you want it. I pulled some strings." Inside the building, they were greeted by a young captain who led them to a large, high-ceilinged room dominated by what appeared to be the interior of a tank turret, surrounded by computer screens and control systems. "This is our newest tank simulator," the captain explained. "State-of-the-art, designed to train the next generation of tank crews without burning diesel or risking equipment." Tommy looked at the setup with growing interest. "And you need instructors." "Not just any instructors," Charlie corrected. "The best. Men who've actually been in combat, who know what it's really like." I told them you were the finest gunner I've ever served with. Tommy slowly circled the simulator, examining the controls and sight systems. "Looks like they got most of it right," he commented, professional assessment overriding his initial skepticism. "They want you to make sure they get all of it right," Charlie said. "Full benefits, civilian contractor pay grade, and no more getting shot at. Plus, you'd be shaping the next generation of tank crews." Tommy was quiet for a moment, then turned to Charlie. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," Charlie said simply. "After everything we went through, I owed you this much at least." The captain tactfully excused himself, leaving the two veterans alone with the simulator. "You know," Tommy said, settling into the gunner's seat with practiced ease, "I never thought I'd sit in one of these again after Lost Heaven." Charlie took the commander's position beside him, the familiar arrangement bringing back memories of countless training exercises in two very real battles. "Different kind of war now," Charlie observed. "The tanks are still important, but the battlefields are changing. Asymmetric threats, terrorism, weapons of mass destruction. The next generation needs to understand both the old and the new." Tommy nodded thoughtfully. "And who better to teach them than the men who fought both?" "Exactly," Charlie agreed. "So what do you say? Ready for one more deployment?" Tommy's hands ran over the controls, muscle memory guiding his movements. "You know, when I was lying in that hospital bed, not sure if I'd make it, I kept having this recurring dream. I was back in Steel Justice, you were giving targeting orders, and everything made sense. The world outside the tank was chaos, but inside, we knew exactly what to do. That's what made us good at our jobs," Charlie said. "Clarity of purpose." "I lost that for a while," Tommy admitted. "But this, He gestured to the simulator. This could give it back, a chance to pass on what we learned. So that's a yes? Charlie prompted, smiling. That's a yes, Tommy confirmed. When do I start? Back at Fort Benning's Tank Museum, elderly Charlie finished his story, his voice trailing off as the memories settled back into their proper places. Matthew and Sophie stared at him and Tommy, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. Is that really what happened, Grandpa? Matthew asked after a long silence. Charlie exchanged glances with Tommy. The official version is quite different. Something about a training accident and classified weapons testing. But now you know the truth, Tommy added. Or at least as much of it as we're allowed to tell. Sophie, who had been taking notes throughout the story, closed her notebook. And the contamination site in Mexico? What happened to it? Still quarantined, Tommy replied, though these days it's attributed to a chemical spill from a defunct factory. Most people who live nearby have forgotten it was ever anything else. Matthew looked at his grandfather with new respect. All these years, I thought you were just a tank commander. I had no idea you were involved in counterterrorism. Charlie smiled. That's the point, son. The best operations are the ones no one ever hears about. The two old soldiers paused, looking back at the museum where steel monuments to American military might stood in silent testimony to generations of service and sacrifice. Behind the gleaming tanks and polished brass were countless untold stories, battles fought in shadow, and victories celebrated only among those who had been there. Lost Heaven was just one of many such stories, known fully only to those who had lived it. But its lessons about courage, about sacrifice, about the true meaning of duty, those could be passed on even if the details remained classified. And perhaps, Charlie reflected as he watched his grandson talking animatedly with Tommy's granddaughter, that was legacy enough for any soldier.